It's shocking what he does, you know, to see Nat Turner portrayed as somebody who's addicted to masturbation, for example. Before he goes to his death, that's the last thing he does. With his boy in the woods, that's what he does. To see him depicting Nat Turner as enjoying watching his mother being raped, that's sicker than anything he said in Charles Burnett's film. We'll do this before we have some Q&A. The memory and meaning of Nat Turner's rebellion, coming forth by day. The memory of Nat Turner's 1831 rebellion in the Cross Keys neighborhood, 15 miles from the town of Jerusalem in Southampton County, Virginia, is undergoing a resurrection in the year of 2016. I take the title for this presentation from the actual name of the first full-length holy text on the planet Earth, the Bible composed by the founders of civilization, the pre-Christianity, pre-Islamic Black Egyptians. This sacred book, known to true believers in the profound grandeur of our African past as the Book of Coming Forth by Day, was renamed by the falsifiers of history, renamed as the Egyptian Book of the Dead, in an attempt to make the great civilizers' faith sound as ghoulish as those who try to corrupt the truth. The Book of Coming Forth by Day provides both the keys to and the process of attaining resurrection. The title is a poetic means of expressing the way to make it on up to heaven. The memory and meaning of Nat Turner's words, the meaning of Nat Turner in words and film is being resurrected. It is indeed coming forth by day. W.B. Du Bois wrote in 1903 that the songs created by African Americans during the slavery era invariably breathed, quote, a hope, a faith in the ultimate justice of things. The minor cadences, Du Bois wrote, minor cadences of despair change often to triumph and calm confidence. The meaning is always clear, however, that sometime, somewhere, men will judge men by their souls and not by their skins. I know you noticed that Martin King might paraphrase that. Such a song from this art form that carries the perfect religiosity and therefore that never say die faith in the future is the following resurrected verses from the Nat Turner song. There was a time when Negro could get seriously beat up singing these verses. I give it to you as it's written in Ebonics. You might be rich as cream and drive you coach and four-horse team, but you can't keep the world from moving around, nor keep Nat Turner from gaining ground. And your name, it might be Caesar Show, and got you cannon can shoot a mile or more, but you can't keep the world from moving around, nor Nat Turner from gaining ground. Turner is a veritable patron saint of the idea and fact of slave rebellions in America. The proof of discontent that slave rebellions registered was the teeth and the muscle of the idea of the need to abolish slavery. Despite the most strident efforts of the haters of black people, the name Nat Turner is synonymous with religiously inspired bloody rebellion against the enslavement of Africans in the United States of America. Few topics are more closely guarded and officially hidden from public view than traces of angry blacks rebelling for freedom. Institutional educational racism worked like all hell for centuries to obliterate all proof of the existence of fed-up, mindset on freedom black people throughout the history of this country. Prior to the Malcolm X-inspired Black Studies movement in America, American education, the lies told about freedom fighters and rebellion were the standard modus operandi. The insults routinely hurled at our enslaved ancestors were horrendous. All of this seemed to be designed to create a historically uninformed public, particularly a compliant set of victims primed to receive continuing miseducation Essentially, that's what we're trying to fight against right now in this city. Our people were described with casual deceit as docile, happy-go-lucky, contented, well-fed slaves. Didn't some fool say we were well-fed here recently? The stunted, childlike black mind, it was said, was incapable of conceptualizing deep plots or plans of attack. Tell that to Nat Turner. In the point of studied historical fact, few things are further from the truth than the myth of the contented slave. Enslaved Africans resisted at many levels, and from the literal beginning of their arriving on these shores in captivity to people of European style. Before the idea of an English colony, let alone a country named America, was ever thought up, enslaved Africans lashed out in bids for freedom against the Spanish. The first recorded major slave insurrection in what Christopher Columbus's peeps called the New World occurred in Santo Domingo on Christmas Day in 1521. These Spaniards had to be reminded that Islam was a religion that practiced resistance to oppression. Scores of Wolof men taken from Senegal revolted, killing Spaniards, burning plantations, and winning a week of freedom before they were captured and hung. After this rebellion, Spanish authorities issued their first edict, many more to follow, of prohibiting the enslavement of Africans believed to be Muslims. Y'all know that? The site of the first slave insurrection quite fittingly went down on a plantation that was managed by none other than Diego Columbus, the oldest son of the beast of the transatlantic slave trade himself, Christopher Columbus. The first slave revolt on the shores of what is now the United States of America occurred way back in the summer of 1526. This one had a happier ending for the Africans. A Spanish colonizer named Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón established a slave settlement in what is now South Carolina. Old Boy landed with 500 Spaniards and 100 African slaves. By November, the Africans rebelled, hooked up with the Native Americans, both of whom sent the 150 Spaniards left, packing back to Haiti. 50 years ago, the most covered up facets of historical memory were the facts of the all too numerous plots and hardcore rebellions that enslaved Africans conjured up and made manifest. The print material that had appeared was essentially buried and kept out of school curriculums. Thomas Wentworth Higginson's in-depth essays on 5 slave insurrections, the Maroons of Jamaica, the Maroons of Suriname, Gabriel Prosser, Denmark Vesey, and Nat Turner, had appeared in periodicals The Atlantic Monthly, Harper's, and The Century in the 1850s and 60s as a part of a book called Travelers and Outlaws in 1889, and finally as its own book, Black Rebellion, in 1969. In 1938, Joseph Cephas Carroll's Slave Insurrections in the United States, 1800 to 1865, came into print. 5 years later, Herbert Aptheker's American Negro Slave Revolts appeared. These books provide chapter and verse on some 250 conspiratorial plots and property-destroying and bloodletting rebellions. Instead, schools taught lies that blacks were cool with slavery, that it was like all good, despite abundant evidence to the contrary. To all the factual accounts of violent resistance on the dry land of slavery, we must add the evidence of revolts on slave ships. Greg Grandin's important book, The Empire of Necessity, Slavery, Freedom, and Deception in the New World. This is 2014. Charles likes me to promote literacy, and there it is. Provides a treasure trove of information about Africans pushing back against the willfulness of slaveholders, operatives on the actual slave ships. Reporting on Eric Robert Taylor's book on slave board insurrections, Grandin reports that, quote, 493 slave ship revolts took place between 1509 and 1869. The actual number is at least twice that, since many obscure uprisings aren't included in the tally. The majority of these were unsuccessful. Those that did lead to freedom tended to take take place close to the shores of Africa or America, where the rebels could run the ships aground and escape, end quote. Taylor's book, If We Must Die, Slave Insurrections in the Era of the Atlantic Slave Trade, details that of these 493 shipboard revolts, 120 cases led to the freedom of at least some of the slaves on board. These things are rarely heard and thus virtually unknown in America. Deprived of information, like the aforementioned, people, especially the descendants of those once captured, are too apt to think that we blacks have a legacy of passivity and of being dumbfounded by the vicious, seemingly invincible power by the forces of white oppression. Enslaved Africans practiced daily resistance, as is witnessed by the fact that when the dust settled after the Civil War, it was estimated that some 95% of the formerly enslaved had whip-scarred backs. Enslaved Africans were memorably known for playing stupid, feigning sickness, breaking tools, injuring animals, setting fires, and trying to run away. It's known that there were some 50,000 runaway attempts a year before the Civil War ended. Of course, the internationally extremely popular autobiographies of the runaways who successfully made it were another major form of resistance against that status quo. To the immense shame of American historians, historically considered, slave narratives were not even considered as legitimate sources of historical evidence until the Black Studies movement forced them up their, I should say, down their throats. When I was in college, down south, up to 1966, white Prosper looked you in the face and said, slave narratives. I went to school named after Fred Douglass. And slave narratives weren't evidence because black people couldn't be objective about our experience, you know. And I said, well, who could? They look you straight in your face. Like you still on plantation and said, well, we can't. Charles Burnett's cautious 2002 docudrama, Nat Turner, A Troublesome Property, is a product of the virtually non-activist era that was the George Bush presidency, as well as a product of an American film industry that historically has not permitted genuine free expression for neither male nor especially female African-American filmmakers. Those companies are infamously addicted to the proposition of not utilizing the abundant African-American literature for its sparse number of movies depicting black life. There were over 265 autobiographies of runaway slaves published before the Civil War, yet only one of those has been made into a major Hollywood film as of this date. The Hollywood American movie industry was 99 years old before it grew the gonads to make an authentic slave film, 12 Years a Slave, which honestly depicted the enslavement of Africans on these shores. One cannot help but notice that it was the work of a black man from England, Steve McQueen, and not one of our freshwater blacks, as we call them. The Africans are saltwater blacks, you get what I mean. As welcome as that movie was, it's also true that it's one of the softest of the slave narratives ever published. You know? Solomon Northup's story truthfully fit the typical Hollywood formula of good whites coming to the rescue. That's the way it went down. His white family did save him. Good. 12 years is not a lifetime of slavery, though, is it? The best movie made on the enslavement of Africans up in here is the Ethiopian filmmaker Haile Gerima, who teaches at Howard. His Sankofa, 1993. Most black film studies texts conspiratorially failed to even mention that. Critiques of and information about Sankofa are as rare as signs of intelligence in Lil Wayne or Drake CDs. It's considered more absolutely safe to put the truth in a book in American society, since the country's population is conditioned to be notoriously and sometimes belligerently unread. Turner is inarguably the most written about of all enslaved Africans in American literature and history, and inarguably the most feared and therefore the most misinterpreted. The sheer weight of Nat, the living embodiment of white enslavers' fear. The brother that came for his, meaning his people's liberation, has held the white race's imagination in thrall since 1831. Even otherwise, otherworldly minded racist wordsmiths like Edgar Allan Poe, himself a Virginian, like William Styron. But Styron didn't say that he's from the very Southampton County that Nat Turner terrorized. Poe squirmed in the grips of Nat Turner's freedom now menaced. The only novel Poe ever wrote, the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, was a prolonged meditation on what the fulfillment of slaveholders' fears of slave insurrection would cost them. Poe's novel supernaturally fictionalizes the impossibility of whites trying to escape the color-based hell that they themselves had created. He showed seafarers trying to reach Antarctica, the South Pole, only to find that tropical blacks were there too. The ocean was black, you know, the sand was black, the people were black, the teeth were black, blacked out. You know? They'd land at an island with the made-up name of Tassalal, which has the exact latitude and longitude. Poe was an artist. He was a crazy racist, but he was an artist, okay, of the scene of Nat Turner's insurrection in the state of Virginia, where they find muscular, jet black natives who are both vindictive and bloodthirsty. The climactic scene in Poe's novel depicts shrewd blacks first deceiving, then slaughtering a crew of white enslavers. Despite all the verbiage, literary and otherwise, spewed about Nat Turner, the full extent of information that remains about him has not been honestly, let alone fearlessly interpreted. Because the idea of analyzing why and how blacks had pushed and fought back against our captivity has too long been a taboo topic. We don't like to talk about race. In-depth information about any enslaved African is necessarily incomplete and scattered. Nat Turner is one of the few slave narratives where a brother or sister actually knew when they were born, knew the actual birthday. Necessarily incomplete and scattered, but when the captive was a freedom fighter, willfully distorted omissions are the order of the day and the night. Notice how House Negro in charge, Dr. Skip Gates, in Charles Burnett's film, openly lies about the extent of historical information actually left about Turner. There's no Turner back there, he petulantly opines. This comprador Negro even pathetically bends over to defend twisted racists such as William Styron's Wright to distort what is known about the revolutionary Nat. Okay? In-depth information about any enslaved African, okay, is hard to come by. Okay? But when it's Nat Turner, when Nat Turner's are the case in point, then the sleight of mouth obfuscating guard dogs are let loose to try to hold off the attack dogs of justice.
Right.
What has been passed down about Nat Turner, both in historical evidence and in African American folklore, is compellingly more than the defenders of the status quo and the white superiority in the poison past would have us believe. The year 1800 was a fated one from the anti-slavery rebellions down south point of view. That was the year of Gabriel Prosper's planned rebellion in Richmond, Virginia. It was also the year in which Denmark Vesey purchased his freedom, winning a lottery in Charleston, South Carolina. Okay. It also was the year when the white revolutionary John Brown was born, May 9th, 1800. The black revolutionary Nat Turner was born October 2nd, 1800, one of the few slaves who knew that birthday. He was born 5 days before Gabriel Prosper was executed. I'm just saying, 1800 was a bad year for those folks. There's some important aspects of who Turner historically was in the context of the rebellion he led. Far more than is typically known about the hardcore era on enslaving Africans in America. Evidence abounds, relatively speaking, that Turner established an immense reputation among enslaved Africans in Southampton County, Virginia, for his intelligence and his spirituality. He actually led slaves in baptismal services in local rivers. He was a man who knew the Christian Bible by heart. He was a man his was a nearly unparalleled leadership that was deeply acknowledged. When Turner called out to the recruits in the Cross Keys area, they responded. His 6 men grew to at least 60, maybe 80 freedom fighters, including free blacks. Far more than an impulsive lashing out against mistreatment, the related events occurred at a crucial time in the history of slavery in Virginia and in the country. The economic benefits of slavery in Virginia were in serious decline from the 1820s onward. Large plantations were breaking up, unlike the movies. Small farms with 3 or 4 slaves were the rule, and their value, the slave's value, shrank. Nat Turner, a male slave in his physical prime, was only worth $375 at the time of his execution. We know that because the state, when you killed somebody's slave, they had to pay the owner of the slave what the person was worth. Plus, white people migrated out of the state of Virginia so much so that when Turner struck, the numerical odds were so favorable. Blacks comprised 60% of the country's population in 1831, the county's population in 1831. The rebellion jumped off after the best-selling 3 editions of of David Walker's searing anti-slavery, Let's Get It On Rebellion Manifesto appealed to the colored citizens of the world. 3 editions from 1829 to 1830. No one has been able to prove that Nat Turner, a literate man, was familiar with, or had read, or needed to read the appeal to make his move. Okay? It is known that copies of Walker's book were found in Southampton County, and that's where the trail of wonder ends. Turner's rebellion is noteworthy for the shrewdness in its planning and the daring revolutionary audacity of its intent and follow-through. He ran away from Cross Keys for a solid month and returned before the rebellion, presumably because of a beating from an overseer. The historical suspicion persists that Turner ventured the 25 miles into the Great Dismal Swamp, the location of uncounted thousands of maroon runaways that reached from southern Virginia into northern North Carolina. It was widely thought, from Turner's own reported words, that he and his people sought to conquer Jerusalem and fade into the swamp. The solar aspects of the summer of 1831 contributed mightily to the spirit of rebellion back then. The solar eclipse in February and the unusual coloration of the moon, changes in the summer, in August in particular, were widely interpreted as religious signs, especially by slaves. As well, there were slave insurrections that broke out all around the Great Dismal Swamp, even down into Wilmington, North Carolina, in the same time period. So much so that they appeared to be coordinated. When questioned about it, Nat Turner stood revolutionarily firm, acknowledging that, quote, strange appearances about this time in the heavens might prompt others to this undertaking, yet he denied any knowledge of it. He stood firm without remorse in every respect, told the judge that he didn't feel guilty, shook up the courtroom when he said that. Even refused the final offer to make a plea, mocked his hangman's fumbling with the ropes at execution time, and went to his death with calm composure. Folk memory has it that when he was yanked up by the noose, it was seen that he had written on one foot in blue, war, and on the other foot, rumors of war. When they were done with him, Turner's body was given to surgeons for dissection, and according to tradition, souvenir purses were made out of his black eye, $350 a pop. The level of family nurturing that Nat Turner received was remarkable and is too often overlooked. Having the advantage of knowing his atypical grandmother who praised and encouraged his intelligence, and being born of rebellious parents, Nat Turner was destined to be trouble for slaveholders. According to local tradition, his African-born mother had to be restrained from killing him when he was born rather than see him grow up a slave. His father, according to folk legend, escaped when Nat was a boy and made it back to Africa, some say. It needs to be stressed that Turner was married, okay, and the father of a son, Gilbert, and a daughter, Melissa. His young wife Fanny had to be tortured with bullwhips before she was forced to give up his papers, which a Richmond newspaper, the Constitutional Whig, in an article a lot of people think was written by Thomas Gray, sensationally claimed that it looked as if it had been written with blood. Additionally, and remarkably, there's the rare memoir, The Family of Nat Turner, 1831-1954, written by his granddaughter, Lucy May Turner, and first published in the Negro History Bulletin in 1955. Filled with strictly inside information found only in her piece, yet discoverable by truly inquisitive researchers, head Negro in charge Skippy Gates. She tells the story of her father's, Nat's son Gilbert, and how he was rescued from the auction block that sent his mother and sister into total historical anonymity. Lucy May Turner's family history reveals that a white woman in Southampton County, Virginia, known only in her piece as Miss Mary, purchased Gilbert Turner and guarded his identity even from her husband in order to save him from being sold down the river. This is a story that could only come from Gilbert Turner, who revealed that Miss Mercy is good, surreptitiously gave Nat Turner, quote, the only Bible he ever possessed, end quote. Revealed that Miss Mary had the sense and the heart to recognize and admire Nat's intelligence and talents. We're told that she could feel that the dwarfing of black lives were what slavery was all about, and thus she empathized with his desperate disgust that stemmed from the physical violence of which he and his parents were subjected to by overseers. When the Civil War ended, this woman aided Gilbert Turner to make his way to Ohio, where he resided, first in the Ohio River town of Marietta, and then on to the town of Zanesville, which is near the center of the state, where he started his family. Nat's granddaughter, Lucy May, is an extraordinary historical presence. She taught in the public schools of East St. Louis, Illinois. It's not a town for chumps. For 46 years. Okay? She earned BA degrees from Wilberforce in 1908, Ohio State University in 1934, and a law degree from the University of St. Louis in 1950 at age 66. Have mercy. Lucy May Turner also published a book of poetry called About Colored Folkses, okay, in 1938. This book has long been out of print, but 6 of his poems are reprinted in Maureen Honey, a sweet name, Maureen Honey's anthology, Shadowed Dreams, Women's Poetry of the Harlem Renaissance. The foregoing wants to contribute to the intense expectation about Nate Parker's forthcoming translation of the Nat Turner narrative into a dramatic feature film called The Birth of a Nation. The movie is slated for release in October. His book, The Birth of a Nation and the Making of a Movement, is due out September 27th, okay? The memory of who Nat Turner was and what his divinely inspired reputation represents is on the verge of experiencing a resurrection in the United States. The decision to allow what has been long considered unthinkable to openly examine and depict on film a righteously bloody slave rebellion did not appear out of thin air. Film is the most restrictive art form in this country in terms of unadulterated truth. At the same time, film is more important to too many Americans than any book ever was. I've had people tell me, no, I haven't read the Bible, but I've seen 6, 7 Bible movies. Slap the taste out of their mouth. The American people at large commonly accept movies as points of reference for reality and even as truth itself. These shoes of which I speak fit the feet of university-trained heads as well as those who just did their book time in secondary schools. I'm just saying. We cannot forget that the idea of pushing Parker's cinematic idea came forward as a public matter only after the Academy Awards clique had once again snubbed all black potential nominees and created a firestorm of irate black protest. We ain't dead yet. We African Americans must always stand ready to demonstrate to white haters and cultural thieves that we are neither asleep nor lulled into a grinning